What do you want here, you parasite? Those words still echo in my mind, bouncing off the wooden beams of my mountain lodge like a curse that refuses to die. My son's wife screamed that at me, inside the home my late husband built with his own 2 hands, nail by nail, board by board. The same hands that held me when I cried, that wiped away my tears when the doctors told us there was nothing more they could do. The same hands that are now cold in the ground while this woman stands in his sanctuary, wearing MY robe, drinking MY wine from MY crystal glasses, calling me a parasite. The audacity. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it all still makes my chest burn with a rage so pure, so white-hot, that I can taste copper in my mouth. But let me tell you something in that moment, when she hissed those words at me like a snake protecting stolen territory, something inside me didn't break. It crystallized. It hardened into something sharp and unforgiving, something that had been buried under years of swallowed insults and bitten tongues. "I'll call the police," she threatened, her voice shaking with fake authority, clutching that wine glass like it was a weapon. And you know what I did? I smiled. For the first time in months, maybe years, I smiled a real smile, not the polite, accommodating smile I'd worn like a mask for so long. This was different. This was the smile of a woman who had finally reached the end of her patience. "Go ahead," I whispered, my voice calm as winter morning air, "if you can." Then I walked right past her into MY living room, and from that moment, from that very second, I watched her entire world collapse, piece by piece, brick by brick, like a house of cards in a hurricane. And I stood there, silent and still, watching it all fall down. You want to know how we got here? How a 64-year-old widow ended up standing in her own home, being called a parasite by the woman who married her son. Sit down. Pour yourself something strong. Because this story is going to burn, and before it's over, you're going to understand exactly why some people deserve to watch their worlds crumble. My name is Margaret Williams. I'm 64 years old, widowed for 3 years now, and until recently, I was what you might call a generous woman. Too generous. Dangerously generous. The kind of generous that people mistake for weakness, the kind that invites vultures to circle overhead, waiting for their chance to pick your bones clean. The mountain lodge, God, how I love that place and hate it all at once now, was Harold's final project before the cancer took him. My Harold, my beautiful, stubborn Harold who insisted on building it himself even when his hands started shaking from the chemo. "This is going to be our piece, Maggie," he'd say, hammering away despite my protests. "When the world gets too loud, when people get too demanding, we'll have this place. Just us and the mountains and the quiet." He was right about the quiet. The lodge sits on 47 acres of pristine Colorado wilderness, surrounded by pine trees that stretch toward heaven like cathedral spires. The air up there is so clean it hurts your lungs at first, so pure you can taste the snow even in summer. Harold designed every inch of it, the stone fireplace that dominates the living room, the wraparound porch that catches the morning sun, the master bedroom with windows that frame the mountain peaks like a living painting. It was our sanctuary, our escape from a world that had become increasingly cruel and demanding. Harold built it with his architect's eye for beauty and his carpenter's hands for craftsmanship. Every beam was placed with love, every stone chosen with care. It was supposed to be where we grew old together, where we'd sit on the porch in matching rockers, watching seasons change and grandchildren play in the yard. But Harold died before we could make those memories. The cancer ate him alive from the inside out, and I watched the strongest man I'd ever known wither away to nothing. I held his hand as he drew his last breath, right there in our bedroom at home, with the morning light streaming through the windows just like he loved. His last words to me were, "Take care of the lodge, Maggie. It's your piece now. Your piece now." If only he could see what his piece had become. After Harold died, I couldn't bear to go to the lodge for months. Every corner held his ghost, every room echoed with his laughter. The silence he'd built for us felt like a tomb. So I stayed away, throwing myself into my work as an architect, designing other people's dreams while my own collected dust in the mountains. My son Marcus, Harold's stepson really, but Harold raised him like his own from the time the boy was 8. He knew I was struggling. He'd call me every week, checking in, making sure I was eating, making sure I wasn't drowning in grief. Good boy, Marcus. At least, I thought he was a good boy. Mom, he'd say. He always called me Mom, never Margaret, which used to warm my heart. You should use the lodge. Dad built it for you as much as him. Don't let it sit empty. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. The wound was too fresh, the loneliness too sharp. So the lodge sat there, 47 acres of peace and beauty, maintained by a local caretaker, but otherwise empty. A monument to love lost, to dreams deferred. And that's when Sabrina entered the picture. Sabrina. Even saying her name makes my jaw clench. Sabrina with her bottle blonde hair and her fake nails and her designer clothes that cost more than most people make in a month. Sabrina who latched onto my Marcus like a tick on a dog, sucking him dry while whispering sweet poison in his ear. Marcus met her at some trendy bar in Denver 2 years after Harold died. She was 28 to his 35, a wannabe influencer with a beauty salon and more debt than sense. But she was pretty in that artificial, Instagram way, and my boy was lonely. I understood lonely. I understood the desperate need for warmth in a cold world. At first, I tried to like her. I really did. When Marcus brought her to Sunday dinner, I smiled and asked questions about her work, her family, her interests. But there was something about her that set my teeth on edge, the way she looked around our house like she was appraising it, the way she interrupted Marcus when he spoke, the way she never quite met my eyes when she talked to me. Still, Marcus seemed happy, and after losing Harold, I would have done anything to see my son smile again. So when they got engaged after a whirlwind 6-month courtship, I bit my tongue and wrote the check for their wedding. $25,000 for one day, more than Harold and I spent on our entire honeymoon. But I wanted Marcus to be happy. I wanted him to have love in his life, even if it came wrapped in designer packaging. The wedding was a circus. Sabrina invited everyone she'd ever met, half of whom she clearly barely knew. I watched from the mother of the groom's table as she posed for endless photos, her smile bright and empty as a billboard. Marcus looked overwhelmed but happy, and that's what mattered. That's what I told myself anyway. After the wedding, things changed. Slowly at first, so gradually I almost didn't notice. Sunday dinners became monthly, then sporadic. Marcus stopped calling as often. When I did see them, Sabrina would monopolize the conversation, talking about her business, her plans, her dreams, always her. And Marcus would sit there, nodding along like a bobblehead, agreeing with everything she said. Then came the requests for money. It started small. A few hundred here and there, car repairs, unexpected bills, business expenses. Marcus would call, apologetic and embarrassed, explaining that they were just a little short this month, that things would be better soon. And I'd write the check because that's what mothers do. That's what I told myself anyway. But the requests got bigger. And more frequent. Suddenly they needed $5,000 for new equipment for Sabrina's salon. Then $10,000 because she wanted to expand. Then $15,000 because they were having cash flow problems. Each time, Marcus would promise it was the last time, that they were getting back on their feet, that things would be different. And each time, I'd write the check. Because I loved my son. Because I was drowning in my own grief and loneliness, and helping them made me feel needed, made me feel like I still had purpose. Because Harold had left me well provided for, and what good was money if I couldn't help the people I loved? But it was never enough. There was always another crisis, another emergency, another reason they needed my help. And slowly, I began to notice that my generosity was being taken for granted. Expected. Demanded, even. The final straw should have been when they asked me to co-sign for their mortgage. They wanted a house in an expensive neighborhood, something way beyond their means, and the bank wouldn't approve them without a guarantor. Someone with assets. Someone with good credit. Someone like me. I should have said no. Every instinct I had screamed at me to refuse. But Sabrina had tears in her eyes when she asked, talking about how much she wanted to give Marcus a real home, how important it was for them to build their life together. And Marcus looked at me with those puppy dog eyes he'd had since he was 8 years old, and I melted. So I signed the papers. I guaranteed their mortgage, putting my own financial security on the line for their dream house. Because that's what family does, right? That's what love looks like. Wrong. So terribly, devastatingly wrong. Once they had their house, the requests for money didn't stop. If anything, they increased. Now they needed furniture for their new place. Now they needed a new car because Sabrina's broke down. Now they needed help with the monthly payments because business was slow at the salon. And through it all, I noticed that I was seeing less and less of my son. Our relationship had become purely transactional. They called when they needed money, and I provided it. No more casual conversations, no more sharing what was happening in our lives, no more of the easy warmth we'd once shared. But the worst part, the part that still makes my chest tight with fury, was how Sabrina started treating me. The polite facade dropped, bit by bit, until she barely bothered to hide her contempt. She'd roll her eyes when I spoke, interrupt me mid-sentence, make little comments about older people and their outdated ideas. Once, when I brought up possibly using the mountain lodge for a family vacation, she actually laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a full-throated laugh of derision. "That old place," she said, wrinkling her nose like she'd smelled something foul. "God, no. Who wants to be stuck in the middle of nowhere with no cell service and no decent restaurants? That's not a vacation, that's punishment." Marcus said nothing. He just sat there, silent, while his wife mocked the place his stepfather had built with love and dreams and dying hands. That night, I cried for the first time since Harold's funeral. Not just for the insult to Harold's memory, but for the realization that I was losing my son to this woman who saw everything, including me, as either useful or disposable. But I kept writing the checks. I kept answering their calls. I kept hoping that somehow, someway, things would get better. That Sabrina would mature, that Marcus would find his backbone, that we could be a real family again. I was such a fool. The breaking point came 6 months ago. I was having dinner alone again when my phone rang. Marcus, of course. But this time, his voice was strange. Nervous. Guilty. "Mom," he said, and I could hear Sabrina in the background, her voice sharp and insistent. "We need to talk to you about something important." They wanted me to sign over the lodge to them. Just like that. Just sign it over, deed and all, so they could manage it properly, while I was getting older and might not be able to handle the responsibility. The audacity took my breath away. They weren't asking to borrow money anymore. They weren't even asking to use the lodge. They wanted me to give it to them. The place Harold built with his dying hands, the sanctuary he'd left for me, the last piece of him I had left in this world. "It just makes sense, Mom," Marcus said, his words tumbling over each other in his haste to get them out. "We're younger, we can take care of the maintenance issues, make sure it doesn't fall into disrepair. And this way, it stays in the family." Stays in the family. As if I wasn't family. As if I was some stranger they were graciously allowing to exist on the periphery of their lives. I said no. Firmly, clearly, without equivocation. The lodge was not for sale, not for transfer, not for discussion. Sabrina got on the phone then, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "Margaret," she said, "not Mom, never Mom, just Margaret like I was some acquaintance. I think you're being a little emotional about this. We're not trying to take anything from you. We just want to help." Help. She wanted to help me by taking the last thing Harold left me. I hung up on her. That was 6 months ago, and it was the last time I spoke to either of them. Oh, they called. They sent texts. They even showed up at my house once, but I didn't answer the door. I was done. Done being their personal ATM. Done being treated like a burden. Done pretending that their greed was love. But I missed them. God help me, I missed my son. I missed the boy who used to help Harold with projects around the house, who called me mom with genuine affection, who used to hug me like he meant it. I mourned him like I mourned Harold, because in a way, I'd lost them both. So when December rolled around and the anniversary of Harold's death approached, I decided to go to the lodge. I needed the peace he'd built for me. I needed to remember who I was before I became someone's personal bank account. I needed to grieve properly for Harold, for Marcus, for the woman I used to be before I let people walk all over me. I called the caretaker, Jim, to let him know I was coming. He seemed surprised. I hadn't been up there in over a year, but pleased. The place could use some life in it, Mrs. Williams, he said. Been too quiet up there. I packed a bag with my favorite books, some warm clothes, and a bottle of Harold's favorite whiskey. I was going to spend the weekend remembering my husband, maybe finally spreading his ashes in the place he loved most. I was going to heal. I should have known it wouldn't be that simple. The drive up to the lodge takes 2 hours from Denver, winding through mountain roads that get progressively narrower and more isolated. It's beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way, pine trees heavy with snow, peaks that scrape the belly of the sky, silence so profound you can hear your own heartbeat. As I rounded the final curve, my lodge came into view and my heart stopped. Every window was blazing with warm yellow light. Cars were parked in the driveway, cars I didn't recognize. And through the windows, I could see people moving around inside, laughing, celebrating. Someone was in my house. For a moment, I sat in my car, engine running, staring at the impossible scene before me. Maybe Jim had forgotten to mention something. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe I was having some kind of breakdown and imagining things. But the laughter drifting from the house was real. The lights were real. The cars were real. Someone was in Harold's sanctuary, and they were having a party. I turned off the engine and walked toward the front door, my feet crunching through the snow, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the living room window, I could see them clearly now, a dozen people seated around MY dining room table, eating what looked like Christmas dinner. Turkey, wine, the works. And there, at the head of the table, sitting in Harold's chair, was Sabrina. She was wearing my blue silk robe, the one Harold gave me for our anniversary 2 years before he died. She was drinking from my crystal wine glasses, the ones we'd gotten as a wedding gift 30 years ago. And she was holding court like a queen, gesturing grandly with MY glass in MY house at MY table. The rage that hit me was like a physical blow. Hot and sharp and overwhelming, it stole my breath and made my vision blur at the edges. How dare she? How dare she sit in Harold's place, wearing my clothes, drinking my wine, acting like she owned everything? But I forced myself to breathe, to think, to observe. The other people at the table, I could see them more clearly now. An older couple that had to be Sabrina's parents, based on the resemblance. A younger man who might have been her brother. A few other relatives, maybe. All of them dressed nicely, all of them clearly enjoying themselves, all of them treating MY Lodge like it was their family vacation home. And Marcus. My son was there too, of course, sitting at Sabrina's right hand like a faithful courtier. He looked uncomfortable, kept glancing toward the windows, fidgeting with his napkin. But he was there. He was part of this invasion, this theft, this desecration of everything Harold had built. I took out my phone and called Jim, the caretaker. "Jim," I said when he answered, "did you give anyone permission to use the lodge this weekend?" "What?" "No, ma'am. Nobody's supposed to be up there except you." "Why?" "Because there are people in my house right now. A lot of people." Silence. "Then, that's impossible. I was just up there yesterday doing the weekly check. Place was locked tight." "Well, it's not locked now." "Mrs. Williams, you want me to come up there?" "I can be there in 20 minutes. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'll handle this myself. I ended the call and stood there in the snow, staring at the lights, listening to the laughter, feeling something cold and hard settling in my chest like ice. They thought they could just take it. Just walk into my life, into Harold's sanctuary, and make themselves at home. They thought I was weak, disposable, a doddering old woman who could be pushed around and ignored. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I walked up the front steps, the steps Harold had carved from local stone, and put my key in the lock. The door was unlocked, which meant they'd either broken in or Marcus had given them access somehow. Either way, they were trespassing. Either way, they were about to get the shock of their lives. I opened the door quietly and stepped inside. The warmth hit me first. The lodge was toasty, the fireplace roaring, exactly the way Harold and I used to keep it. Then came the smells: turkey, wine, pine from the Christmas tree they'd apparently put up in the corner. My Christmas tree in my living room, decorated with ornaments I didn't recognize. They'd rearranged the furniture. Harold's reading chair had been moved to make room for more seating around the table. The coffee table where he used to spread his blueprints was gone entirely, replaced by some tacky modern thing I'd never seen before. And the walls. Oh God, the walls. The framed photo of Harold and me on our wedding day, the one that usually sat on the mantelpiece, was gone. In its place was a portrait of Sabrina's family, all fake smiles and coordinated outfits. They'd erased us. Erased Harold, erased me, erased 30 years of love and marriage and dreams, and replaced us with themselves. The rage was so pure, so white-hot, that for a moment I couldn't see straight. My hands shook with the effort of not screaming, not grabbing that portrait and smashing it against the stone fireplace Harold had built with his own hands. But I stayed silent. I stayed still. I watched and listened and let the fury crystallize into something harder and more dangerous than raw emotion. They hadn't noticed me yet. They were too busy enjoying themselves, too drunk on wine and arrogance to pay attention to their surroundings. Sabrina was telling some story about her salon, gesturing wildly, her voice carrying that artificial brightness she used when she wanted to impress people. And I told her, honey, if you can't afford the full treatment, maybe you should stick to drugstore box dye, she was saying, and the table erupted in cruel laughter. Her mother, a thin, sharp-faced woman with the same calculating eyes as her daughter, nodded approvingly. You have to set boundaries with clients, dear. Otherwise, they'll walk all over you. Boundaries. They wanted to talk about boundaries while sitting uninvited in my house, drinking my wine, wearing my clothes. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, taking it all in. The casual way they'd made themselves at home. The expensive champagne they were drinking, champagne that definitely wasn't in my wine cellar when I left. The presents under the tree, wrapped in coordinating paper like some magazine spread. They weren't just using my house. They were living in it. This wasn't a weekend visit or a borrowed getaway. This was a hostile takeover. Finally, Sabrina's mother looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. Excuse me, she said, her voice sharp with irritation. Could you close the door? You're letting the cold in. She thought I was the help. The hired help, coming to interrupt their perfect little family gathering. I didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there in my snow-covered coat, staring at the woman who was sitting in my dead husband's chair, wearing my clothes, drinking my wine. It took another few seconds for the rest of them to notice me. Marcus saw me first, and the color drained from his face like someone had pulled a plug. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. Then Sabrina looked up, and her perfectly made-up face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and finally, fury. What are you doing here? She demanded, spilling wine on the tablecloth as she stood up. My husband said you were in rehab. Rehab. That's what they'd told people. That I was in rehab, presumably for some kind of substance abuse or mental breakdown. That's how they'd explain my absence from their lives, my refusal to answer their calls or see them. The lie was so casual, so effortless, that it took my breath away. They'd written me off as a crazy old woman, dismissed my legitimate anger as the ravings of someone who couldn't handle reality. And they'd used that lie to justify this, whatever this was. Rehab? I said, my voice perfectly calm. No, this is my home. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the fire crackling, the wind outside, the rapid breathing of a dozen people who suddenly realized they might be in trouble. Sabrina recovered first, as I knew she would. She always was quick with her lies. You're home. She laughed, high and artificial. My husband pays the taxes on this place. You're just living off us, like always. You're nothing but an old parasite. There it was. The word that would echo in my mind forever. Parasite. I'd given them hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. I'd co-signed their mortgage, bailed them out of debt, supported them through every crisis and emergency they'd manufactured. I'd been generous to a fault, loving to my own detriment. And to her, I was a parasite. The rage was so pure, so perfect, that it transcended emotion and became something else entirely. Clarity. Purpose. Absolute, unshakable resolve. If that's true, I said, my voice steady as stone, call the police. Let's see whose name is on the deed. The challenge hung in the air like smoke. Sabrina's face flushed red, then pale, then red again. She looked at Marcus, but he was staring at his hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes. We. She stammered, and for the first time since I'd known her, Sabrina was at a loss for words. Call them, I repeated. I'll wait. But she didn't reach for her phone. She couldn't, because she knew exactly what the police would find. What they would see when they ran the address through their system, when they checked the property records, when they asked to see identification. They would see that Margaret Williams owned this house free and clear. That the taxes were paid from Margaret Williams' bank account. That there was no husband named Marcus on any deed, any mortgage, any legal document associated with this property. Because I wasn't some doddering old fool who'd forgotten how property law worked. I was a retired architect who'd bought and sold dozens of properties in my career. I knew exactly who owned what and why and how. The silence stretched on, broken only by the uncomfortable shifting of Sabrina's family members. Her father was studying the tablecloth like it held the secrets of the universe. Her mother was looking between me and Sabrina with growing alarm. The brother, or whoever he was already eyeing the door like he was planning his escape route. Finally, Sabrina's mother cleared her throat. Sabrina, she said carefully, you told us this was your place. It is. Sabrina snapped, but her voice cracked on the words. Tell them, Marcus. Tell them this is our house. All eyes turned to my son, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. It's complicated. No, I said, and my voice cut through the room like a blade. It's not complicated at all. This lodge belongs to me. It has always belonged to me. And you are trespassing. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I'd like to report a break-in, I said, my eyes never leaving Sabrina's face. I've come home to find multiple people in my house without permission. The operator took down the details, my name, the address, confirmation that I was the property owner. She assured me that officers would be dispatched immediately. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. They'll be here in 20 minutes, I said. I suggest you use that time wisely. What followed was the most beautiful 20 minutes of my life. First came the frantic whispering between Sabrina and Marcus. Her voice, no longer confident and commanding, but sharp with panic. His voice, defensive and guilty, making excuses and placing blame. Then came the questions from her family. Pointed, angry questions about what exactly was going on, why they'd been brought to someone else's house under false pretenses, whether they could be charged as accessories to breaking and entering. Sabrina tried to maintain her composure, tried to spin the situation as some kind of misunderstanding. But the cracks in her facade were showing, and they were widening by the minute. "She's confused," she kept saying. "She's old. She doesn't understand how these things work anymore." But nobody was buying it. Not when I stood there calm and collected while she grew more frantic by the second. Not when I had keys to the house and knew where everything was kept. Not when her own husband wouldn't look anyone in the eye. I watched it all with the detachment of a scientist observing an experiment. This was what happened when lies met reality. This was what happened when thieves got caught in the act. This was what happened when parasites suddenly found themselves cut off from their host. The blue lights appeared through the windows exactly 20 minutes later, painting the snow-covered trees in flashes of red and blue. 2 officers made their way up the front walk, their boots crunching through the same snow I'd walked through earlier. I opened the door before they could knock. "Officers," I said. "Thank you for coming so quickly." The first officer was a young woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. The second was an older man who looked like he'd seen every kind of domestic drama the mountains had to offer. "Mrs. Williams?" the female officer asked. "You called about a break-in?" I did. I came home to find these people in my house without permission. Behind me, I could hear Sabrina launching into her prepared story. "Officers, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. This woman is confused. She's been having problems lately, and my husband and I have been taking care of this property for her. She's not supposed to be here alone." The older officer raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, do you have documentation showing your authority to be on this property?" Sabrina faltered. My husband handles all the paperwork." "And where is your husband now?" All eyes turned to Marcus, who looked like he was about to be sick. "I'm here," he said weakly. "Do you have documentation showing your legal right to this property?" Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. I stepped forward and handed the officers my purse. "You'll find my driver's license, the deed to this property, and my most recent tax payment receipt in there," I said. "Everything should be in order." The female officer examined the documents while her partner kept an eye on the increasingly agitated crowd in the living room. After a few minutes, she nodded. "These appear to be legitimate," she said. "The property is registered to Margaret Williams, taxes are current and paid by Margaret Williams, and this woman's identification confirms she is Margaret Williams." She turned to Sabrina. "Ma'am, do you have any legal documentation giving you the right to be on this property? She's my mother-in-law." Sabrina protested. "We're family." "That doesn't give you legal right to enter someone's property without permission," the officer said patiently. "Especially if they've asked you to leave." "But she's confused. She's been having mental health issues." "Show them the rehab papers, Marcus." Marcus looked stricken. There are no rehab papers." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. Sabrina's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Her family members were staring at her with expressions ranging from confusion to outright anger. "You told us she was in rehab," her mother said slowly. "You said the doctors recommended she not be left alone." Sabrina's voice trailed off. "Ma'am," the older officer said gently, "it appears that you've been staying in this woman's home without her knowledge or consent. That's trespassing at minimum, possibly breaking and entering if you forced entry. We have a key." Sabrina said desperately. "Did Mrs. Williams give you that key?" She looked at Marcus, who was staring at his shoes. Tell them you have a right to be here." But Marcus said nothing. Because what could he say? That he'd stolen my spare key? That he'd given his wife access to my property without asking? That he'd helped her lie to her family to justify their invasion of my home? The truth was written all over his face, and everyone in the room could read it. "Mrs. Williams," the female officer said, "do you want these people removed from your property?" I looked around the room at the wreckage of the evening. At the Christmas tree that wasn't mine, decorated with ornaments I'd never seen. At the expensive champagne bottles empty on my counter. At the portrait of Sabrina's family where Harold's picture should have been. At my son, who still couldn't meet my eyes. At the woman who'd called me a parasite while wearing my dead husband's gift and drinking my wine in my home. Yes, I said. I want them gone. What happened next was swift and efficient. The officers asked Sabrina's family to gather their belongings and leave the property. Most of them were already halfway out the door. They'd clearly figured out which way the wind was blowing and wanted no part of whatever legal trouble Sabrina had gotten herself into. Her father paused at the door. "We're sorry," he said quietly. "We were told this was different. We wouldn't have come if we'd known." I nodded. These people were victims too, in their way. Victims of Sabrina's lies and manipulations, just like I had been. Sabrina herself was the last to leave, clinging to denial until the very end. "This isn't over," she hissed as the officers escorted her to the door. "We're family. You can't do this to family." "Family doesn't break into each other's homes," I said quietly. "Family doesn't lie about each other. Family doesn't steal." The door closed behind them with a soft click, and suddenly the lodge was silent except for the crackling of the fire. The officers took my statement, gave me a case number, and assured me that charges could be filed if I decided to pursue them. After they left, I stood alone in my violated sanctuary, looking at the mess they'd left behind. Dirty dishes, empty bottles, crumbs on the floor. The portrait of Harold and me lay face down on the mantelpiece, shoved aside to make room for their family photo. I picked up Harold's picture and held it in my hands, running my fingers over the glass. We'd been so young when it was taken, so full of hope and dreams and love. He'd been building our life together even then, planning our future with the same care and attention he'd later put into building this lodge. "I'm sorry," I whispered to his image. "I'm sorry I let them in. I'm sorry I let them take pieces of us and throw them away." But as I stood there in the firelight, holding the remnants of my old life, I realized something important. They hadn't really taken anything from me. They'd tried. God knows they'd tried. They'd stolen my money, invaded my home, erased my pictures, and called me names. But they couldn't steal Harold's love. They couldn't take away the memories we'd made together. They couldn't destroy the peace he'd built for me in this place. All they'd done was show me who they really were. And more importantly, they'd shown me who I really was underneath all the years of imposed guilt and manipulation. I was not a parasite. I was not weak. I was not disposable. I was Margaret Williams, and this was my house. But the reckoning wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, I made coffee in my own kitchen and sat at my own table and opened my laptop. If Sabrina wanted to play games with family bonds and legal rights, then we were going to play. But we were going to play by my rules. I started with the banking app, pulling up account after account that I'd been paying into for years. The joint account I'd set up to help Marcus with emergencies. The business loan I'd co-signed for Sabrina's salon. The credit cards I'd guaranteed when their credit was too poor to qualify on their own. With a few clicks, I removed Marcus as an authorized user on the joint account. Not closed it, that would come later, but locked him out of access. The balance showed over $40,000, money I deposited to help with their endless stream of financial crises. Next came the business loan. As the cosigner, I had certain rights, including the right to demand immediate payment if I felt the loan was at risk. Considering that the borrower had just committed a felony by breaking into my home, I'd say the loan was definitely at risk. I drafted a formal letter to the bank, explaining the situation and demanding they call the loan immediately. Full payment due within 30 days, or the assets would be seized. The salon, the equipment, everything. The credit cards were even easier. A few phone calls to customer service, explaining that I no longer wished to guarantee accounts for people who'd proven themselves untrustworthy, and the cards were canceled. Any outstanding balances became immediately due. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I pulled up the property records for their house. The one I'd co-signed for, the one that was probably worth less now than they owed on it. As the guarantor, I had the right to pay off the mortgage and take ownership if I felt my financial interest was at risk. And oh, did I feel it was at risk. A few more phone calls, a few more forms, and I'd initiated the process to foreclose on their mortgage. It would take a few weeks to work through the system, but when it did, they'd find themselves homeless as well as broke. Each action I took was perfectly legal. More than legal, it was responsible financial management. I was protecting my assets from people who'd proven themselves untrustworthy. I was cutting ties with individuals who demonstrated they saw me as nothing more than a bank account with legs. I was taking back my power. My phone rang while I was transferring the $40,000 from the joint account into my personal savings. Marcus, of course. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again, and again, and again. Finally, I answered. Hello, Marcus. Mom. His voice was strained, desperate. We need to talk. Do we? Please. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But this has gotten out of hand. Sabrina's family is furious. They're blaming me for everything. And now our credit cards aren't working, and the bank is calling about the business loan. I said. So you've noticed. Noticed what? Mom, what did you do? I protected my financial interests, I said calmly. I removed my support from people who've proven themselves untrustworthy. Untrustworthy? Mom, we're family. There was that word again. Family. The magic word that was supposed to excuse everything, justify anything, forgive all sins. Family, I repeated. Tell me, Marcus, what did you tell Sabrina's parents about me? Silence. Tell me what lie you used to explain why I wasn't in your lives anymore. Tell me what story you made up to justify taking over my home. More silence. I'm waiting. Sabrina said you were having problems. That you needed help. What kind of problems? Drinking, he whispered. She said you were drinking too much and having memory issues, and that the doctors recommended you go somewhere to get help. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. They'd painted me as an alcoholic with dementia, a dangerous old woman who couldn't be trusted to live alone. They'd used that lie to justify stealing my home, my peace, my sanctuary. And you believe that, I said. You had been acting strange. Not answering calls, not wanting to see us. And with Dad gone, I thought maybe I was falling apart without a man to take care of me? That's not what I meant. Isn't it? You thought poor old Margaret couldn't handle life without Harold, so she turned to the bottle and lost her mind. And that gave you the right to take control of her property, her life, her dignity. Mom, please. I know we screwed up. I know we shouldn't have used the lodge without asking. But we can fix this. We can make it right. How? I asked. How do you fix 3 years of lies? How do you fix stealing from me? How do you fix calling me a parasite while wearing my clothes and drinking my wine? I never called you that. No, but you stood by while your wife did. You said nothing while she humiliated me in my own home. You were an accessory, Marcus. You helped her do it. I could hear him crying now, soft sobs that might have moved me once upon a time. But that was before. Before I learned what they really thought of me. Before I saw how easily they could write me off as a crazy old woman. Before I understood that my love meant nothing to them beyond what it could buy. The joint account is closed, I said matter-of-factly. The credit cards are canceled. The business loan is being called. And I'm foreclosing on your mortgage. You can't do that. I can, and I have. You wanted to be independent of the old parasite? Congratulations. You're about to get your wish. Mom, you're destroying our lives. No, I said, and my voice was steady as stone. I'm just stopping paying for them. I hung up on him. The phone rang again immediately, but I turned it off. I had work to do. Over the next week, I systematically dismantled every financial connection I had with Marcus and Sabrina. Every cosign loan, every guaranteed credit line, every bit of support I'd provided over the years gone. The efficiency of it was almost beautiful. Decades of financial entanglement dissolved with a few phone calls and some signed documents. Money that had flowed from my accounts to theirs like water suddenly stopped, leaving them high and dry in a desert of their own making. The salon was the first to go. Without the guaranteed credit line, and with the business loan being called, Sabrina couldn't make payroll. Her employees quit. Her clients went elsewhere. The landlord evicted her for non-payment of rent. The house followed soon after. Without access to the joint account, they couldn't make the mortgage payment. And with me exercising my rights as guarantor, the foreclosure process moved with remarkable speed. Marcus called me dozens of times. Left voicemails that progressed from angry to pleading to desperate. Sabrina sent text messages full of threats and accusations, promising to sue me, to have me committed, to destroy my reputation in the community. But what could they do, really? Everything I'd done was legal. More than legal, it was financially prudent. Any lawyer would tell them the same thing. Any judge would side with the woman protecting her assets from people who'd stolen from her. They'd made their bed with lies and theft and casual cruelty. Now they had to sleep in it. The final blow came 3 weeks after the confrontation at the lodge. I was having my morning coffee and reading the newspaper when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. Margaret. The voice was shaky, broken. Sabrina. Yes. Please. I'm begging you. Please stop this. Stop what? You know what? The foreclosure, the loans, everything. We're going to lose everything. You already lost everything, I said calmly. The moment you decided I was disposable. I was angry. People say things when they're angry. I didn't mean it. You meant every word. And more importantly, you meant every action. Breaking into my home, lying about me to your family, erasing my pictures, stealing my peace. You meant all of it. We can pay you back. I'll get another job, we'll sell stuff, we'll do whatever it takes. With what money? Your salon is closed. Your credit is destroyed. Your house is being foreclosed on. What exactly do you plan to sell? Silence. Then, why are you doing this to us? The question hung in the air like smoke. Why was I doing this? Was it revenge? Justice? Simple self-preservation? Maybe it was all of those things. Maybe it was none of them. I'm not doing anything to you, I said finally. I'm just not doing anything for you anymore. There's a difference. You're destroying our lives. No, Sabrina. I'm just not funding them anymore. If your lives can't survive without my money, then maybe you should ask yourself what that says about the lives you've built. She was crying now, desperate, broken sobs that might have moved me once. But that was before I learned what she really thought of me. Before I saw how easily she could dismiss my pain and steal my joy. Please, she whispered. We're family. Family, I repeated. Let me tell you what family means to me, Sabrina. Family means my husband working on this lodge with his bare hands even when the chemo made him so weak he could barely stand. Family means holding someone's hand while they die and promising to protect what they built. Family means respect and love and consideration for each other's feelings. I paused, letting that sink in. Calling someone a parasite while wearing their clothes and drinking their wine in their own home? That's not family. That's theft. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I'll do anything, I'll say anything, just please stop this. You know what I want to hear, Sabrina? What? Anything. I want to hear nothing. I want silence. I want peace. I want to never have to think about you or talk to you or worry about what you're going to take from me next ever again. You can't mean that. I can and I do. The next time you find yourself in trouble, call the police, like you said you would that night. Maybe they can help you. I ended the call and turned off my phone. 2 days later, I received official notice that the foreclosure was complete. Marcus and Sabrina had been evicted from their house. The business loan had been satisfied through the seizure and sale of the salon equipment. All outstanding credit card balances had been written off as uncollectible, which would destroy their credit for years to come. Sabrina's empire of arrogance and entitlement, an empire built on my money and my generosity, had crumbled to dust in less than a month. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no regret, no triumph. Just the quiet peace of a problem finally solved. I drove back up to the lodge that weekend, alone this time, as it should be. The house felt different now, cleaner somehow, like a spiritual infection had been purged from its walls. I spent the weekend putting things back where they belonged. Harold's picture returned to its place of honor on the mantelpiece. The furniture arranged the way he'd designed it. The Christmas tree they'd put up removed and disposed of, along with all traces of their invasion. By Sunday evening, the lodge felt like home again. Like the sanctuary Harold had built for me, not some stage set for other people's drama. I made a fire and sat in Harold's reading chair with a cup of tea and one of his favorite books. The silence was profound, no traffic, no neighbors, no phones ringing with demands for money or time or attention. Just peace. Perfect, absolute peace. That's when I finally cried. Not for Marcus. Not for the relationship we'd lost, not even for the money I'd spent over the years trying to buy love and respect. I cried for the years I'd wasted being someone I wasn't. For the dignity I'd traded away for the illusion of family harmony. For the woman I'd been before I let other people define my worth by my usefulness to them. But mostly I cried with relief. Because I was free. Free from their demands, their crises, their endless neediness. Free from the burden of trying to love people who saw me as nothing more than an ATM with legs. Free to be Margaret Williams again, instead of Marcus's mom or Sabrina's bank account or anyone else's source of funding. The fire crackled and popped, filling the silence with warmth and light. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the mountains in pristine white. Inside, I sat surrounded by memories of a man who'd loved me for who I was, not what I could give him. This was what Harold had built for me. Not just a house, but peace. Not just shelter, but sanctuary. A place where I could remember who I was before the world started taking pieces of me. I'd fought for it, and I'd won. Not just the legal battle, but the deeper war for my own soul. I'd reclaimed my dignity, my self-respect, my right to exist without having to purchase love with cash. 3 months later, I received a single text message from Marcus. No apology, no explanation, just 5 words. Sabrina left. She's gone. I read it twice, then deleted it without responding. It didn't matter anymore. They'd chosen their path when they called me a parasite and tried to steal my home. Whatever happened to them now was a consequence of their own choices, not my responsibility. I was done being responsible for other people's bad decisions. Done funding other people's mistakes. Done sacrificing my peace for the illusion of family harmony. I was Margaret Williams. I was 64 years old. I was a widow and a retired architect and the owner of 47 acres of pristine mountain sanctuary. And I was finally, completely, utterly free. The mountains were beautiful that spring. The snow melted slowly, revealing green meadows and wildflowers that Harold had planted years before. I spent my days reading on the porch, hiking the trails we'd walked together, and gradually letting the lodge fill up with peace again. Sometimes I thought about Marcus, wondered if he was okay, if he'd learned anything from the destruction of his marriage and his financial security. But mostly, I didn't think about him at all. He'd made his choice when he handed my spare key to a woman who hated me. He'd made his choice when he stood silent while she called me a parasite in my own home. Some choices can't be undone. Some words can't be taken back. Some betrayals cut so deep that forgiveness becomes impossible, not because of hardness of heart, but because of hardness of wisdom. I'd learned that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's enablement. It's weakness disguised as virtue. It's the slow suicide of the self in service to people who don't deserve it. Harold used to say, "Be generous, Maggie, but never let them take your backbone." I'd forgotten that lesson in my grief. Let guilt and loneliness make me weak. But I remembered it now. I remembered who I was before I became someone's personal charity. The sun was setting behind the mountains as I finished my tea, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that Harold would have loved. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the call of a lark, clear and sweet and free. I was free too. Free from the burden of other people's expectations. Free from the prison of purchased love. free to be alone without being lonely, to be generous without being used, to be kind without being weak. The night was quiet and cold and perfect. Inside my sanctuary, surrounded by memories of real love and honest affection, I finally understood what Harold had built for me. Not just a house. Not just peace. He'd built me a fortress where I could remember who I was. Who I'd always been underneath the guilt and the manipulation and the endless demands for more. Margaret Williams. Architect. Widow. Survivor. Woman who'd finally learned the difference between being alone and being free. And as the stars appeared over the mountains, bright and cold and distant, I whispered into the darkness. There are no more parasites in my life. Only peace. The words echoed through the lodge like a prayer, like a promise, like the final line of a story that had taken too long to tell, but had finally reached its proper ending.